All right, I'm going to go ahead and get started. Welcome, everyone, to our special webinar for today. My name is Susanna Baruch. I'm the Executive Director of the Petrie-Flom Center for Health Law Policy, Biotechnology, and Bioethics at Harvard Law School. Today's webinar is called Locked in a Hotbox: The Impact of Climate Change on the Incarcerated. And today's program will be a deep examination and exploration of how climate change impacts people who are incarcerated. So just a few notes of housekeeping before we start. You can submit questions at any time using the Q&A feature found in the meeting controls at the bottom of your screen. The chat will be turned off for participants during the webinar. You can also join the conversation or submit questions on Twitter or X using the tag @Petrie-Flom. We will also share this captioned event video with all registrants within 1 or 2 weeks. If you have any technical issues during the webinar, feel free to email us at petrie-flom@law.harvard.edu. We will be doing our best to help you. Thanks to Laura Chong and Lisa Gorelick working all the things behind the scenes today. And if you're interested in Petrie-Flom Center's upcoming events, news, or education programs, you can use the QR codes on the screen or to go to our website to check out the website, subscribe to our newsletter, and read our blog, Bill of Health. With that, it is my pleasure to introduce Stephen Wood, visiting researcher at the Petrie-Flom Center and an acute care nurse practitioner. Stephen has been a visiting researcher with us at Petrie-Flom Center since 2020. He holds several interesting leadership and teaching positions at Northeastern University's Bouvet College of Health Sciences, as well as the Tufts University School of Medicine. With that, and with gratitude for his inspiration for today's event, I am handing it off to you, Stephen.
Well, thank you, Susanna, for that very kind introduction. And actually working in the emergency department today, and in the interest of wanting to get really into the program, our office today is stuck on 84 degrees. So I wanted to bring some realism to this event. But this is an important topic. We tend to spend a lot of time thinking about climate change. We also do a lot of work in the field of incarceration here at Petrie-Flom. This is really going to be a pretty unique event, looking at both of these issues together. And this is something that hasn't received kind of the attention that it probably deserves. And I'm very excited to bring our fantastic panel to the forefront on this topic. To introduce that panel, I'm going to introduce my co-moderator, Jeremiah Gulka. Jeremiah is the Senior Fellow and Director of Justice Policy at the Action Lab at Northeastern University School of Law, which is housed in the Center for Health Policy and Law at Northeastern. The Action Lab was founded by previous Petrie-Flom Center presenter, Professor Leo Beletsky, and the lab works to reform the criminal justice system through a variety of public health lenses. Jeremiah is also the executive director of the Action Lab's training program, the SHIELD Training Initiative. He recently created the Actions Lab new program called Climate and Public Safety, or CAPS, which we'll be learning a little bit more about today. And previously, Jeremiah has been a researcher at the RAND Corporation, where he was professor of criminal justice policy in the Pardee Rand Graduate School and a trial attorney at the U.S. Department of Justice. He clerked on the Fifth Circuit and earned his law degrees at the University of Chicago in Edinburgh. So welcome, Jeremiah, and thank you for joining us today.
Thanks so much, Stephen, and thanks to everybody to Susanna and everybody at the Petrie-Flom Center for the opportunity to talk to you all today about an issue that, as Stephen said, we think is only beginning to get some notice. But I'll assume that if you're joining us today, you're probably aware that climate change is already impacting the health and safety of people across the United States. And as you've probably noticed, the U.S. criminal justice system, however you want to call it, criminal legal, whatever. I know there are lots of different terms for it. It can be a little bit fraught, but we'll just call it criminal justice, is unprepared to address the challenges of climate change and environmental degradation. Very few agencies have acknowledged or taken any action to address the many ways these crises intersect and harm public health, public safety, equity, and the occupational health and safety of their own personnel. So we created the Climate and Public Safety Initiative at the Action Lab at Northeastern to start addressing this void. Our goals are to map the intersections, which we've started doing through a recent article published in the Northeastern University Law Review, to start building a community of practice featuring practitioners, personnel, policymakers, scholars, community stakeholders, impacted people, and advocates, to translate and disseminate the existing research base, which there is some, but still tends to be small out these different areas of intersections, to conduct and to help facilitate original research, and collect and develop tools that policymakers and agency leaders can use in order to mitigate and adapt to these intertwining challenges. We think that there are a bunch of opportunities actually for win-win action that can improve public safety, public health, resilience, and thriving among personnel in the communities they serve. Personally, my interest in this work is rooted in my experience in the response to Hurricane Katrina, where I helped build and then served as the lead staffer on a local, state, federal joint task force that was created to rebuild the New Orleans area criminal justice system at a time when at least those in the criminal justice field were not talking very much about climate change. Then again, we were actually seeing its real world effects, from flooded police stations and cruisers to flooded evidence rooms to incarcerated people facing flooded jail cells, often non-existent evacuation planning and exposure to the elements while waiting transfer to other jails and prisons, where many of them were then lost for months in the system. In trying to address some of those challenges, I got to know our first panelist. Her name is Catherine Fontenot, when at the time she was the assistant warden of Louisiana State Penitentiary at Angola, which is the state's maximum security prison. And she was tapped by the state secretary of corrections to be the point person for the state on this task force. Today, Kathy is the warden of the Baton Rouge jail, where she is lieutenant colonel and chief of corrections for the East Baton Rouge Sheriff's Office. Kathy has worked in prisons or jails her entire adult life. After a stint as a guard, she quickly moved into leadership roles, leading accreditation efforts for the state, becoming one of the state's youngest assistant wardens, gaining her master's in criminology, managing to have 3 kids somehow in that time, and then also go on to run 2 jails, teach criminal justice and corrections at the university level, and serve in various roles such as being past president of the North American Association of Wardens and Superintendents. You may recognize her from numerous documentaries and the reality show Louisiana Lockdown. Kathy's going to start us off by sharing her on-the-ground insights within correctional facilities. Then we are going to hear from Joel Thompson, who will share his on-the-ground observations within the legal and policy landscape. Joel Thompson is the managing attorney of the Harvard Prison Legal Assistance Project, which is a student practice organization at Harvard Law School where students have the opportunity to represent state prisoners in prison disciplinary hearings, parole hearings, clemency petitions, and other matters. They also get the opportunity to provide legal research support to prisoners and engage in policy advocacy and public education about prisoners' rights and the conditions of confinement. He started his career at Harvard working in as a student in the Prison Legal Advocacy Project. He then went on to a career before coming back to PLAP. He spent 14 years at the Prisoners Legal Services of Massachusetts, which is a statewide legal aid office that counsels and advocates for and brings civil rights litigation on behalf of people in Massachusetts jails and prisons. He coordinated the office's healthcare advocacy, policy and litigation efforts, assisted pro se litigants and attorneys who represented prisoners in healthcare litigation. And he started his career as a federal court clerk in Burlington, Vermont, and worked at some law firms in Portland, Maine, and Bridgeport, Connecticut. Lori Levinson will then wrap us up with a broader systemic view of challenges and potential solutions before we go into the Q&A period. Professor Levinson is the David W. Burnham Chair in Ethical Advocacy at Loyola Law School in Los Angeles, California, She's also the founder of Loyalist Project for the Innocent. She teaches evidence, criminal law, criminal procedure, ethics, white collar, crime, trial advocacy, and importantly for this webinar, a seminar focusing on the impact of climate change and the criminal justice system, which I'm confident is the first course like that to exist anywhere in the United States. She has authored more than 250 articles and 13 books, two of which are very relevant for us today. One called Climate Change and the Threat to US Jails and Prisons, and the other Climate Change and the Criminal Justice System. She attended Stanford and UCLA Law School, where she was the chief articles editor of the UCLA Law Review. She clerked on the Third Circuit and then was an assistant United States attorney for 8 years, holding the positions of chief of appeals, chief of training, and assistant division chief. That's quite a lot, but just goes to show you what a great panel we have today. So thank you for joining, and back over to you, Stephen.
Great, thanks. Well, with no further ado, let's go forward and launch in. And so I wanted to welcome Kathy Fontenot to the panel. Kathy, please join us, and we look forward to hearing from you. Little delay here. Kathy, if you could bring yourself back on screen. All right, maybe we're having a little technical difficulty.
Yeah, I'm trying. Can y'all hear me?
All right. Yeah, we can hear you.
Trying to get back to the
No problem.
video.
This is why, definitely sell yours. No, I won't even say it. Yeah, let's see if we can see if Petrie-Flom can help bring your
Sorry,
photo
I'm
back.
having trouble
But if
getting my
I think
video
we're
back
okay on audio. Let's just go with the audio. We can all hear you. And then I'm going to pop down. Looks like we lost her altogether. So why don't we, in the interest of time, it looks like we lost Kathy. Lori, do you think you could start us off? I know you have some slides, and I know that's
yeah, I'd be delighted
cool.
to, and it would be better with her, but I'm going to do my best. For all of you joining us, thank you so much. I'm really honored and privileged to be here, and I'm going to use some images. Kathy is back. Do we want to go back to Kathy now?
Let's stay where, let's we're flexible here at Petrie-Flom. So why don't you go ahead, Lori, and we'll go back to Kathy after your presentation, and then we'll wrap it up with Joel.
Okay, so let's see if I can do this. Please tell me if you're seeing the slides.
We're good.
Okay, excellent. So my name's Lori Levinson. I'm really delighted to be here. And I had no idea after 35 years as a law professor, and as you mentioned, 8 years as a prosecutor, that my focus would very much be on this aspect of the criminal justice system, because I think that this is a significant issue across the country and one that has not received much attention. And more importantly, it requires not only a national effort, but probably an international effort to address these issues. I'm heartened by the fact that the European Court just today reached a decision that frames climate change issues as human rights issues. And that's no more important than any other issue in the criminal justice system that we're going to discuss. So I want to talk a little bit about what's happening in these hot boxes and the disproportionate impact it has on inmates. Let's all keep in mind that across our country, we have 2.3 million inmates in a variety of custodial situations, and some of them, frankly, are more vulnerable than others. We have an aging population. 16% of our population in the prisons are over 55 years old, and many of them 30% receive significant mental health treatment. So for these people, they are caught in the worst of all situations because they have no control over the environment, and the environment is decaying. And it's not a static model. climate change is changing. So in some areas, it's the heat index. Some it could be tornadoes or flooding or other types of climate events. We tend not to pay attention to any of this until there are crises. So as Jeremiah knows, when Katrina hits, all of a sudden they realize they have inmates who are trapped in institutions, what to do with them, or if COVID hits and you see what's happening in those, or, and most likely, there's a major lawsuit. So in California here, we had a case back in 2001 that involved overcrowding. We were close to 140% capacity. So any problem, and climate change is a problem, will have multiplying effect on the system. The medical conditions across the board can exacerbate what happens with climate change. Because don't forget, you have inmates who are taking various types of medication. They come in with inherent conditions of asthma. They have increasingly diabetes. So all of the systems work towards this issue of how are we going to deal with it and with climate change. And we are playing catch up, folks. There's been very little investment or reinvestment in our facilities. When you go to the taxpayers and you say, we need more money, and they think, why would I give it to the prisons when I should give them to the schools? You have to explain that this is part of our society's responsibility. So I want to spend a little bit of time, I'll be out in my 10 minutes, on what's happening here on the West Coast. We have extreme heat. This diagram shows you, and we have on record that 8 of the 10th warmest years on record have happened in the last decade. So you're saying, how hot is it? I know it's 84 degrees in your emergency room. It's regularly 100 to 125 degrees in some of our institutions because we built our prisons through the Central Valley that just heats up. We are cooking our inmates. We also have the projection that it's just going to get worse and that the number of extreme heat days, I mean, those are days where people cannot function, including the correctional officer or the community, is increasing. We also have wildfires. Nearly every county in California has been exposed to wildfires, I should say. And of course, we're using our inmates to fight these wildfires. And that too will increase. And if you take a look at where the risk is right where the prisons are. Now, I'm sure nobody intentionally did this, but this is the layout that has to be considered. In addition to that, we have flooding. So in January 2023, we announced an emergency because of the heavy rains and our prisons were just flooding. And there's nowhere for people to go when we haven't made these emergency plans. As you can see here in the Tulare Lake area, it is surrounded by our penal institutions. Now, there was an excellent report that recently came out last year out of a group in UCLA that is trying to get public attention on this. And in doing so, they do various approaches that we can consider too. Financial, it costs over $100,000 to keep some of our inmates in custody. 34 of our facilities are overcrowded, and they're all relying on something called the CDCR, the California Departments of Correction and Rehabilitation, to make good on adjusting to climate change. So I quickly want to mention some of the proposals that we should think about. One, obviously, is reducing our incarceration population, especially as it ages. The other is creating rapid release policies. You may say, aren't they already there? No, they're not. Closing prisons that are the most vulnerable to environmental hazards. We just closed for a rehab our death row. Updating state emergency plans, creating minimum standards, requiring annual reports on climate hazards, just putting it in somebody's consciousness, reallocating funds. Most of our prisons do not have air conditioning. They do not have adequate ventilation. And then expanding emergency preparedness. One of the concerns that we can and should have is that the people in the system, other than the Kathy, who will be joining us today, are not trained or well versed in this. So, in doing so, what tools will we have? The lawsuits have been the major tool. They take a long time, and there's a great deal of pushback on it. So there's been a move towards legislation and executive orders here in California, mainly requiring that the various penal institutions or any that are built have within them both an emergency plan and the information with regard to how they will adjust to planning and investment for climate change. The studies have shown that correctional officers, less than 10%, actually know what the emergency plan is. If there's overheating or fires or the like. How prepared do they feel? 67 to 84% of them say we just don't feel prepared. And then, of course, one of the things we consider is reevaluating our contract with private prisons that have been notorious in not providing these services. Last, we need to reevaluate on the legal level what we mean by an Eighth Amendment cruel and unusual punishment. Up to now, the thought has been that, gee, if there's just indifference, that's not enough. So we have bought into the let's not pay attention. And the goal for me in a webinar like this is to get people who've been in the traditional realm of criminal justice to start paying attention to one of the most significant threats to us. The inequalities are even more glaring in places like Georgia and Texas, where 70% of them have no air conditioning. They literally have heat domes where I think 13 Texas inmates died from the overheat. There have been efforts by the legislature, House of Representatives, to catch up, and I catch up with all of this. And I want to thank everybody today who's probably thinking, what can you do to start making this issue one of importance for your community? Thank you.
Thank you, Lori. That was, for one, you kept us right on time. So as a moderator, that you can't appreciate that anymore. But two, you really helped to define the overall problem. And I think that's a great lead in summary to talking about kind of some boots on the ground. And I want to introduce Lieutenant Colonel Kathy Fontenot to talk about her boots on the ground experience with these current issues.
Well, first of all, I'm delighted to be here. It's important that we all talk, and I appreciate being invited. Oftentimes, we're not included in the discussion. It's hard to do this job that I feel so passionate about without public support. And I know that the officers who work, at least in the places that I've worked, have done their very best. We are the only part of the criminal justice system, as I like to say, that believes in change. And unfortunately, the buildings and the structures that we have to work with don't change as much as our lessons that we've learned in the professional field of corrections. So we train a lot on what to do, but 70 to 80% of our time is dealing with the old structures that we're working in, because how you feel and how our ability to keep the weather from you, and also the varmints and the pests, for example, and the rising river, as it were, at Angola, for example, every year when we sandbagged with the inmates, that's something that we could not do without the participation of the inmates and communication, both within the system and without, to explain why it is and what we're doing and what we need. And I fault our profession for not being on the front of education. Public health is public safety today, and so much of what we do inside is to make sure that we give to people the means to be successful in the communities that they'll return to. And so much that's happened in the last 30 years that I've been in corrections is so affected by the outside elements. Again, people who do bad things are not necessarily bad people all the time. And the people who serve need all the help we can get to make an atmosphere conducive, safe, secure to really realizing all that we could. Katrina, for those who weren't here, was just a terrible experience. However, we also had a lot of triumphs in that, one of which was state corrections was able to go in and rescue thousands of inmates and staff and their families who had evacuated to the Orleans Parish Prison. Prior to Katrina, the evacuation plan that was in place for the city of New Orleans was to evacuate high, not to leave the city, but to evacuate to high structures. No one could anticipate the breakdown of the levee system that happened. Actually, we survived the storm, and it was a day later when the levee collapsed due to the pumps not working. A lot of other surrounding parishes had actually evacuated to Orleans. That structure housed federal, state, local women, men, and juvenile offenders. The state corrections, because of the things that we have on our emergency plans, quickly assembled and was able to come with all of our resources, probation and parole, and the adult prison system, to come in and to evacuate inmates 4 at a time by flat bottom boats, and then up one at a time up a ladder where they reach the higher portion of the interstate, and then bus them to Hunt Correctional Center about an hour and a half away. From there, inmates were dispersed by buses and sent to 48 different facilities across the state, one of which was Angola. We received the largest amount of males, and we also received 500 women. It was the first time that we had held women in Angola since the 1960s. So that was a lot of just, to assume, I think it was 2,600 inmates over the 5,000 inmates that we already had, was quite a chore. I can tell you that the inmates that were present used a lot of their money that they had earned from the famous Angola Prison Rodeo to buy bus tickets for the pretrial inmates and people in the custody of New Orleans, some of which were actually not even arrestees. They were homeless people seeking shelter. We were actually able to use those funds the inmates donated to send inmates, released citizens back into all the shelters where their families had been sent all across the United States, as far as Seattle, from what I remember. So I say all this because now I find myself at a local jail that's was built in the 1960s, and the wear and tear on this jail is just obvious. There's rust and there's mold. It doesn't drain correctly. Our ventilation is down. There's a $2 million project right now for taxpayers to put a new roof on, and it's just very disheartening that we can't convince taxpayers that we need something better to do our job. And the fact is that we educate, medicate, house, clothe, transport lots of people. We offset the deficiencies that are in our community. And I'm very proud of the work we do. We just wish we could do more to, better equipped our inmates with the information and the power to go back out and protect their families. I think the green corrections is actually a thing. It's been around for about 15 years now, and I was always intrigued by it. We do create large carbon footprint. We do create a lot of pollution if we don't use our resources responsibly. And that's something that's a great training program for inmates and staff alike that brings a lot of pride to us when we can be involved with community representatives and things like that. As a warden, I think it's very important for us to be open and give a seat to people who want to contribute to our efforts. We are not standalone or island places that you can't reach now. Prisons and jails are very much a part of our community. And I think going forward, because of the large amount of inmates that we have, I'm all for releasing when we absolutely don't need to house someone. I'm also for being active participants in our community during these natural events and disasters so that we can help the citizens get back to normal, can clean debris, can do rescue missions, can do those things, can be a place where people can get food or water or generators are normally in place, and electricity or gas. We've done that before in response to hurricanes. Again, I just really love being a part of this conversation. I think including us and knowing that it's not only cheap labor, but it's manpower that we can use to pull people up from where they are. And again, I'm all about no jails or prisons anymore, just crisis intervention centers. I like to think of what we do in that regard.
Thank you, Lieutenant Colonel. That really helps us kind of focus on the human and ethics side of this problem, and also, the larger scale problem of just the significant amount of incarceration that we have in this country, and recognizing, I love the term that you used, crisis resource center instead of prison or jail. I think that's a great term to think about, how we might be helping to encourage rehabilitation instead of incarceration. And similarly, just how important that system is to think about during these natural disasters. And we're all people, and that not only do we have to think about the safety of these individuals, but also what can they do to help rebuild that environment is also critical. So I thank you so much for that insight. Joel, you have some tough acts to follow here. So let's now talk about some of the kind of legal perspective and policy around this topic before we get to some Q&A.
Sounds good. Thanks, Stephen, and good to be here with everybody. And I don't want to, hopefully won't be retreading old ground. Lori and Kathy have covered so much of it already. I just want to note, having listened to Kathy, how those of us in areas of the country that haven't had a disaster yet, that struck a correctional facility, we should be planning now and taking the lesson, right? We shouldn't be waiting for the bad thing to happen to us. We can learn from the experiences at Angola and other places in California where that has happened. I'm up in the Northeast, and like every place else, I could tell you it's here. Climate change is here, and our system isn't built for this. Our jails and prisons, they're built for security, right? There's very poor airflow, and up where we live, there is not a lot of air conditioning. That's true everywhere. That's true in residences, right? In the Northeast, like, a lot of people take a lot of pride in never, having needed air conditioning before. The old saw about New England was, if you don't like the weather, wait 10 minutes. And that's a lot less true now. We get into much hotter and stickier weather at times, and we get into weather patterns that stick. So in bygone days, I would be working with clients who were in, certain either more vulnerable people or in more vulnerable units in our jail and prison system, the ones that got the hottest when things got hot and humid. And it was easier to say, like, that's really awful. Looks like it's a 3-day heat wave and it's going to break. So, we'll get through it and move from there. That's just no guarantee anymore, as these weather patterns get stickier and kind of hang around for longer. And we're not built for this legally either. In Massachusetts, where I practice, there is a public health standard for heating in the wintertime and how cold you can allow a prison unit to get. There's no standard for cooling and for any maximum temperature or humidity or heat index that you can let a unit get. That's just not a thing that exists in our law in this state. And as a result, as Lori noted, it affects everybody. And we see it in our work here. Our law students represent people in the state prisons so many of whom are taking medications for whom heat is a real problem, whether it's side effects or the inefficacy of their medicine. The elderly, people with chronic diseases and disabilities, for whom heat, humidity is a real problem. And really for everybody. I mean, anecdotally, and I think statistics would back this up as well, but anecdotally, when conditions get uncomfortable, conflict rises, and that's bad for everybody. It's bad for our incarcerated clients. It's bad for the people who work there. It's bad for the program staff and volunteers who come in, and the loved ones who want to visit the jails and prisons and see their loved ones there. It's bad all the way around. So we have work to do. We have work to do around, improvements to ameliorate those conditions. And that's a lot easier said than done. Lori alluded to the Eighth Amendment standard. When it comes to conditions of confinement, it's a pretty forgiving standard. Yes, it does violate an incarcerated person's rights if a prison knows of and disregards a substantial risk of harm. That's essentially what the standard is. But over and over again, we've seen the courts, be very forgiving of prison administrators, of those over their heads who control the purse strings when it comes to jail and prison conditions. And if reasonable measures are being taken, if a court decides there's some response happening and it's reasonable, then that will be deemed good enough. It's very difficult to get relief through the courts on your best day. I would say it's even harder to get relief through the courts before the bad thing happens. And what I think everybody wants is for us to plan ahead and get out ahead of it so we don't have the bad thing happening. Another problem, and I'm sure Kathy can appreciate this, is how diffuse the responsibility is for the problems that we're talking about. So a prisoner in an unsanitary, overheated, in whatever kind of condition, or if there's a disaster and there's flooding, what is the recourse? Well, they can file a grievance within the prison, grievance system, and that will go to an officer on site, and who's got a limited capacity to do anything about what is happening with, when it comes to climate change. And you can appeal up the chain of command, and your superintendent or warden is also going to be terribly limited in what they can do. I mean, even with the more mundane conditions issues, I spoke once with a superintendent, about shower access and how many showers were either broken or moldy and thus being shut down and not made available to the folks in that particular prison. And he said, I put in the request to get those fixed up. I want them fixed, but, I don't control that when that happens. I get in, that request gets in line with 1,000 other requests and doesn't go anywhere. And so not only within our jail or prison systems, our county governments or state government, it goes outside of corrections, right? Because the responsibility really lies with, higher echelon public safety officials, administration and finance, ultimately the governor and the legislature control policy and control budget. And that's a lot of what we're talking about here. When it comes, to things like capital maintenance, capital improvements, prisons historically and jails are last in line. I don't think there's any reasonable dispute about that. Would you rather fund a school, a university, a hospital improvement, or one to a jail or a prison? And I think we know what our elected officials do and have done over time. And so in the best of times, that's a challenge. And I would say it's going to be even more challenging now because of climate change, because there are so many more capital projects out there that need to be done in those schools and universities and hospitals and other public buildings. And we want to change our transportation sector. And we want to decarbonize our state. And that's all got to happen yesterday. It's all got to happen right now. And so I fear it's going to be very difficult to get the kind of attention to incarcerated people and the people who work in our jails and prisons and the conditions that they are living in every day. That's going to be a big challenge because there's only so much money to go around, and there's only so much time and attention to be devoted to all those many projects, all of which are important. So I guess one other thought that I'll add is, and echoing what Lori had said, and Kathy, we should really reconsider our prison footprint, just like our carbon footprint. That's a tough habit to quit. We saw this with COVID. When it comes to our criminal legal system, in most places during the pandemic, in some places we did a reasonable job of slowing things down on the front end of the criminal legal system and not bringing as many people into jail. I don't know of many places at all that did a very good job on the back end. It is very difficult to persuade anybody to be more flexible around releases, emergency releases, even things like furloughs. And it's odd to me because it's as if we pretend that once somebody has been sentenced, that like that number is so sacrosanct that everything else, it doesn't matter how big the other priority is. We have to hold someone to that very last day. And to the point that the others have made, I think when it comes to what we are looking at going forward here, and I think we can look forward to more emergencies. And if somebody has 6 months left on their sentence and they're getting out anyway in 6 months, and we can ameliorate some of the conditions by letting them out, why wouldn't we let them out? That argument has been made before. I've been one of the people making it. It falls on deaf ears. It certainly did during COVID. But I'm hoping this time around, it won't fall on deaf ears. So I'll stop there. Thanks.
Great. Thank you so much, Joel, and bringing that perspective, really wrapping things up, kind of tying things together with regard to the legal and the policy issues that are really facing this problem. I want to invite all of our panelists back on camera, including Jeremiah. We've got some great questions from our audience, and I think we'll give each of you probably an opportunity to answer these to start. Then if we get a little closer to time, maybe we'll aim questions towards the most appropriate person. But the first question that I received, and I think this is probably the most important one, right, because data drives change, is who's monitoring this? Who's monitoring the impact of heat, the impact of cold, or other disasters in the prison population? Is there anyone that's looking at this data from a federal perspective, or is it through organizations? Where is this data being derived from, and how is it getting out to the policymakers and the lawmakers that need to see that data? And Jeremiah, do you want to start that conversation, or if there's anyone else, we can even do a little raise your hand?
Sure. And then I'd be curious if anybody could correct me, which is no one, and it's not. But I hope, Lori, good. I'm glad someone is, because my perception.
Jeremiah is exactly right, but I will say that's part of the effort right now to make environmental impact reports literally a part of every reporting cycle for correctional institutions. I want to thank Kathy so much for your thoughtfulness, and Joel as well, and your remarks. But you're the individual. There has to be an institutional commitment. And so one of the recommendations is that there be an annual report of every climate hazard experienced by an institution, any building or changes and how that's going to be impacted by climate. Just get it on people's radar screen and grab the information. So far, at least in my experience, Jeremiah, because I think you're right, where's the data come from? It comes from lawsuits. And that's the least efficient way to go back and try to get this data.
Yeah, I think that you're right. I think it's hard when we are fighting so many lawsuits to actually document what we're doing too. So I know that the American Correctional Association and the National Institute of Jails, they do have standards. Those standards are largely due to the importance of that we recognize that there's a physical structure that we operate in, right? I wrote a lessons learned report that was funded from some source, like the National Institute of Corrections, I guess it was. And it was about what we had learned during Katrina. a lot of those things and were published in emergency manuals and stuff like that. It's just, I think, just like when you ask taxpayers to care enough to pay or to vote or think about this issue, it's the same breaking into research and things like that. I mean, it's just, I've read a lot of reports about climate change, and it wasn't until recently that correctional officers were even included in that group. It was mostly about inmates, and that's fair. That's why I'm in here. There's inmates to care for and to have custody for. I can tell you that working with medical professionals, working with legal professionals is how I am successful in what I do. When COVID came along, we had 500 inmates that we looked up. I stayed here till midnight working with the actual DA, called him, and we let 500 people go in the next couple of days that just didn't need to be in jail. And we've continued to do that practice of not bringing in misdemeanors who just don't need to be in jail. So I think that's the only really thing that we can do is talk about these things and say, hey, you know, let's not go backwards. Let's go forwards. We don't have the resources to continue to be as hard on crime and to treat it with only incarceration. We know that there's a lot of resources, but each community has really got to, at the local level, before it spreads to the federal and the state level, we've really got to get our stuff in order, which is why I came over from the state to the local, because I'd like to prevent murder. And I think that can be done at this crisis intervention point, which is jail. Jail is very much a part of the community. Again, we did such a good job during COVID. On the heels of a threat of a lawsuit, a federal judge actually came and stepped in and said, you guys actually were doing it the right way. And it was never published because we didn't get sued. And which was great, because I had the chief doctor of infection control from a big hospital here come over and walked through the facility, saw the PPE that we had, saw what we were doing. It's such a dirty place, and we're so used to cleaning so much that we were spraying down mattresses and things like that. And COVID did actually not spread to our general population, although we were arresting 50 to 70 people less during that time a year. The state hospitals actually fared worse than we did. And it was simply because we were so used to being clean, because we have this building that's literally falling around us, and we'll shut down something to do that. But I think that unless we have this conversation start locally and people start understanding that the tax dollars they're spending are more in lawsuits because we don't have facilities built on new theories and new ways, and they can be smaller, right? We can build greener corrections that are smaller to actually support operations rather than bed capacity. That needs to stop. We don't need to build a new jail based on a bed capacity projected of how many individuals will be born of a certain race in the next 5 years. That's ridiculous. We need to build it around medical and mental health support of our communities. That's what we need to do. And we need to have something court related on site to speed through that process, to not cause the backlog of people that need a mental health housing and to get through the court system before they do that. So again, I appreciate being here. I really appreciate all the comments.
Lori, I think you wanted to add to that
Yeah,
as well.
just one follow-up on where the conversation had, but I want to answer some of the other questions too. You know, how to get the public to care. Well, the public cares when it affects them. And I think if they realize that climate change, you can, connect the dots, exacerbate health problems. We have a jail here in Los Angeles where 50% of the jail population has hepatitis, has been exposed to hepatitis. Those inmates get out, and then that affects the community. And when you talk about things like flooding in jails, that spreads disease. So it's almost like you have to scare the public into, you need to know this because it's coming to your community soon.
I promise this is my last comment, but because we did such a good job, I forgot to add, our inmates did not need to use the ventilators at the hospital. So we ran out of ventilators here in Baton Rouge. It made the national news. And the doctors, the reason they came and supported so much of what we were doing here is we kept inmates here, not on ventilators, so people's grandmothers could be on the ventilators. Because believe it or not, and that's what I tell people, this is called criminal justice. We get those beds before your grandmother. So my new thing to try to encourage people to care and build this new jail is, if you care about your grandmother, you want us to have a good medical center and mental health facility here on the grounds of this prison. So anyway,
Kathy,
thank you.
You bring up some great points. You bring up some great points, and I do want to just emphasize, something that someone stated, which is, we really also need to think about how you operationalize and harmonize this data collected to ensure that everyone's reporting the same data. What we don't want to see is that, people are coming and changing the data to meet the needs of that institution to say, well, we don't really have a problem with heat or cold or smoke or air quality or water quality, because we don't have a defined standard. So I think that was a great comment by one of our attendees, and I think that's an important piece. This next question, Joel, I'm going to shoot out towards you. This is actually from the office of Senator Ed Markey, who happens to be my senator here in Massachusetts. And the question is, can you speak to the intersection of climate change and prison labor? And are there sufficient protections in place to protect incarcerated individuals when they're working in jobs made more dangerous by climate change, be it heat or cold or air quality?
I can start us off, although Lori would probably have a lot, more to say about that, because it's the use of compulsory labor is like a lot of prison issues. Things are very state by state. Once you know one prison system, you only know one prison system. It turns out, to your point about standardization. So, certainly the risks are there. I haven't seen it play out, on the ground with my clients or, my students' clients at this time yet. One related thing I wanted to flag around climate change, since there's a lot of doom and gloom, why not throw out, one bit of optimism, I think, is, a lot of our clients end up getting trained in the building trades, and a lot more want to than can, because of capacity. From all that I can understand from, the Infrastructure Act and Inflation Reduction Act and where we need to go in our country, we're going to need a lot more people in those skilled trades. And to the extent we can ramp up job training of that sort, to clients who, while they're incarcerated, so that they can hit the ground running when they get out, it will benefit them, their families, it'll benefit us, it'll benefit everybody. But let me shoot it to Lori on that specific question.
No, I agree with you. And in fact, if you want to find people who are innovative, take a look at inmates, because they're trapped in these facilities and they know there aren't the resources or the institutions that are going to do it. So they improvise in some ways that are amazing. And you could, kill two birds with one stone, which is to, train them, get them to work on their own institution in a fair way, and then they'll take those skills to the outside. So Joel, I totally agree.
Any other comments from our panelists?
If I could just jump in really quick on that,
Yes.
I understand that one thing that would just help make that work in practice is that the best job training programs are the ones that have training on the inside and then actually lead to some actual connection when folks walk out the door and re-enter society. And the more programs can be developed along those lines, the more it will actually play out. I have a question for Kathy, but I would cede anybody in the audience who's asking questions first.
Yeah, we do have another good audience question, and then Jeremiah, then we can wrap that question in. And this question, I think, is pretty important to getting the word out on this issue. And we kind of all touched on that. People aren't necessarily wanting to hear from the inmates, but Kathy, you mentioned, and I think Lori and Joel, you all did mention, that there's also an impact on correctional officers in this issue. What's the voice been from correctional officers, and should that voice be louder? This is impacting, not only are these incarcerated populations, but also the employees that work there, whether they're correctional officers or administrative assistants. what's been the impact on that population, and are they talking about this? Is this something that's in their vernacular to have this issue addressed? Probably start with Kathy on that.
Yeah, I think it is. Again, green corrections was, I first learned about 15 years ago at a conference, and some folks from the Northwest were all involved with it, and they're great people. And I could immediately see, I mean, 5,000 life for inmates at Angola, and no one was going anywhere. And we were doing a lot with them. And they were helping us preserve Angola. It's a big farm. That's another, you talk about climate change. We can't farm Angola anymore because the inmates aren't healthy. But in addition to that, we keep flooding every other year. So, much like the Tunic Indians millions of years ago that were there, figured out it's the place that the institution it sits on when that levee goes down due to the rising Mississippi River, due to the melting of the glaciers. It's 20 feet of water in the most densest 2,600 inmates live in that particular one facility that's under 20 feet of water when that levee fails. So the only part of that levee system in the whole country that's not maintained by the Corps of Army Engineers, it's maintained by Angola staff and inmates. So it's something that those officers are very aware of. Now, when we talk about jail, I was talking to some of my folks that work here with me today, and they were like, climate change and corrections, never really thought of that. I'm like, well, that's what's happening. That's why it's so hot here, and we can't do anything about it. That's why we need a new facility that's built not only financially, that would make sense, because we're just pouring millions of dollars in here every year and not seeing anything but big rats come in, literally. So I think that, people in corrections, we're like the lowest of the low in law enforcement. Sometimes we're not even given the respect to say that we're law enforcement. So I think changing what we can bring to the table, speaking up more, writing more about the work that we do correctionally wise, and how we know that these people matter. We know that we're going to run into them out in the community, and we want them to be better people. We want them to be better for their families. We want women to go back and have a shot at reentry just like men do. So there's a lot of issues that I think that corrections people that serve, they appreciate that people come in and see what they do. As correctional administrators, though, I need to allow the public to come in there and do that. I need to be more open and say, hey, come on in. And that's something that there's a lot of people just like me that want to do the right thing, that know that the authority that they have can be used for good. So, and we want to affect positively our community through the people that live in our community.
Well, great. Thank you so much. We're getting close to wrapping up. We have just 2 minutes left to our time, and I want to make sure I make some closing remarks about the wonderful work we're doing at Petrie-Flom. So I do want to give you each just one closing statement, almost like the wait, wait, don't tell you kind of, closing one-liners. I'm going to go in reverse order. So Joel, what do you have to say to close out our program today?
Goodness. Just that's a high standard to meet. Just to feed off that last question and comment, I guess. These are human institutions, and right, and no matter what side you're on or the other, it does no good to anyone to be callous to the conditions that affect everybody who has to walk through there, number one. And number two, unlike almost every other aspect of our society and institutions that our county or state governments run, there's not a lot of foot traffic. There just isn't. And so it's very easy to be out of sight, out of mind. And that is somewhat by design. And as Kathy said, we need to do a better job of pushing back on that, making these issues visible to everybody, because we're all responsible. We all need to take ownership for what is happening in our jails and prisons.
Great. Thank you. I'm going to go to you, Kathy, for a quick one-liner.
Help us, and thank you.
That's a great one. I love that. And Lori?
Get out of your comfort zone. Stop building prisons that are going to pancake on flood zones. Take a look at where the heat index is. It's not that hard. Talk to each other.
Thank you. And Jeremiah, let's wrap it up.
All right. Well, I just want to thank everyone for being here. Thank you to the panel. Thank you, Stephen, for moderating. Thank you to Susanna and Petrie-Flom Center for hosting this. You know, our goal at the Climate and Public Safety new initiative at the Action Lab at Northeastern, we want these conversations to start. We want to recognize we have all these intersections that are happening all over that affect a lot of people. And as you know, Joel said, these are human institutions where we're talking about how you've got people who are incarcerated, you've got people who work there, and then there's the trickle down aspects of how they affect the communities. We have many intersections here, and paying attention to them is key. So thank you for joining today and being part of this conversation, and let's keep this conversation going. I've put my email into the chat and our article. Welcome people to reach out to us or anybody else.
Great, thank you. And thank you to all. Thank you to Petrie-Flom. Thank you to all of our panelists. Thank you to all of you who attended today on this important topic. If you enjoyed this program, make sure to join us at Petrie-Flom on April 11th for ending the mass incarceration of people of color with disabilities. And then the next day on April 12th on endless, excessive, and inhumane confinement in the U.S. immigration and detention centers. Both topics very much applicable to our discussion today. Make sure to listen to Petri Dishes, the Petrie-Flom podcast, and follow the Bill of Health blog, which has many different topics, excellent writers, and just almost daily content on important issues in biotechnology, bioethics, and policy. Follow us on Twitter to stay informed on the latest breaking news in both law, policy, bioethics, and biotechnology as well. So thank you all, and join us next time. Thanks again.